Hey again. So today, as you might be able to notice, I am in the workshop all day long, and I'm going to cut out the metal pieces for the sugar skull today. So that includes the copper flower that sits on his head, as well as the metal parts that goes around his eyes. So what does that include? Well, it's going to include cutting some metal plates to size, as well as using my favorite machine, the CNC machine, to cut out the shapes that I need. So let's get started. I start off by cutting the plate of copper into the dimensions that I want. It goes pretty quickly. And then I had pre-catted or pre-designed the flower shape into the computer. I had also programmed the machine beforehand as well. I had then put the copper plate into one of the school's milling machines. I had a little problems with it at first, because for me to attach the copper plate into the machine, I had taped it on the back with carpet tape. This was necessary because the flower that I was cutting out, it has a lot of thin parts, and the tape was my best option so that the metal plate wouldn't buckle and mess up the flower. Since the copper was such a hard material, I had to have the drill bit go down only 0.1 of a centimeter every time it went around. That's why it took so long to cut out. So I'm halfway through, I think, and it's taken me 2 hours. Here's to another hour and a half. Once the cutting was finally done, I was able to just untape it from the table. Once the flower was done, I could get started on the eyes. And it was just the same process as before, measuring out the size of material that I needed, and then I would cut it. Once I got to the CNC machine, I went ahead and installed both of the steel plates so I could do both of the eyes at the same time. This is the same tape that I used as before. It's just double-sided carpet tape. Then I had to make sure to get it as flat as possible so that the metal wouldn't buckle. I went ahead and made my measurements so I could easily zero the machine one after the other. As before, I had already catted the eye piece and programmed the machine. apparently I hadn't gotten all the bubbles out. So at this point I learned that it didn't work as it had before, how I could just use the tape. So I reinforced it with some screws. I ruined the first one, but I figured I could still get a good eye out of the second piece. I wasn't so sad that I messed up an eyepiece, since each one of them takes about 30 minutes as well, since it's such a soft material, unlike the copper was. So after what felt like a pretty short time, actually, I had my first eye. Once I was done with that eye, I just found some extra material and quickly cut out one more. Hey there! So as you can see, we are back at my desk now. I just got back from manufacturing those parts in the machines, and I got some great parts. I got this flower headpiece here, as well as the two eyepieces. Yes. So I know I said earlier that this flower was taking me 3 hours. Well, that was the first one. However, I had enough time to go back in and do a second one. And I was able to change the machine that I was working on, so I moved up to a stronger CNC machine, I guess you could say, because it was available. And instead of it taking 3 hours, it took 30 minutes. And there's a lot less burrs on the side, so that means a lot less sanding for me. So since those pieces are done being cut out now, I can actually show how I can bend them, and they're gonna create that 3D flower. This 3D flower right here, this was the paper one that I'd shown earlier. See? Yeah. But now, like I said, it's gonna be out of copper, and it's gonna be way cooler. So let's go do it. Once I was done bending those pieces, I could start making the support pieces for putting everything together. This included a top circle piece, which the flower would rest on. I did a quick measuring out of the wire. And then my super secret trick of getting round pieces, just finding the closest size in my kitchen cabinets, really, which at this point turned out to be my smallest pot. Again, I had my preliminary model with me, so I could just measure everything off of that model to see if it was about the right size. I also made 2 extra loops in this circular piece. of which the wire headpiece with the face on it would be connected to, so that it wouldn't slide around or anything. And then it simply just hooks together. Afterwards, I would measure the headpiece to find where to bend the hooks into it. Then the head just slides in. I figured I would clamp him afterwards, though, so that I could still take the two parts apart while I was working on them. Test out the flour. Everything looks good so far. The next step was to actually attach the flour to this support piece. On my earlier model with the paper, I had done it a different way. I just sort of stapled it on with my wire, but I wanted to do something different with this one so that it would feel more stable, more hardy. I tried a couple different ways, but in the end I found that I could just wrap the wire around to attach the flour and the circular piece together in a couple of places around. Once I got it nice and tight, it didn't really slide around and it worked well. I did one final fitting and I decided I liked the way that it looked. So then it was time to move on to the eyes. Like the flower, I had attached the eyes to the preliminary model completely different. I had attached every single circle on one by one. I had sort of threaded them on. But since when I cut them out of the steel, I had made it so that they all stuck together. So I had to find a new way to attach them to the wireframe. This also took me a couple tries. However, in the end I found that I could sort of thread them on in just a couple of places so that it still looked nice, but that the eyes stayed on sturdy enough. And I completely forgot to mention before, and I had lost it on the first model, he does have a nose. So this is me modeling the nose off of my initial drawings that I had done years ago when I was designing the first skull. So I simply had drawn out the shape that I wanted, and now I'm just sort of tracing it with the wire. After a few tests of going back and forth to see if it was the shape that I wanted, I could finally clip off the extra end there and then give the nose a bridge and bend it into its final form. The attaching of the nose was fairly straightforward. I just made a bend at the top of the wire at the height that I wanted. And clamped it on to the circular headpiece. And last but not least, to get rid of those two wires and attach the whole thing together permanently. So I cut off the ends there and threaded it back through, and then clamped those two as well. And then he was done. I think he turned out pretty well. I really love the updated skull. I think the metal parts really suit him nicely. I even realized that he casts a pretty spooky shadow on the wall. Thanks for stopping by.